Hi, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to Series 9 of the Climate Pioneers Show. My name is Cherry, and I'm the founder of Above and Beyond Recruitment, a climate tech recruitment business working with startups and scale-ups to hire mission-driven talent and build their teams. And this series, we are speaking with founders and leaders from scaling climate businesses to hear all about their business journey to date, the challenges they've faced, and the lessons that they've learned along the way. And if you're a founder yourself, perhaps a bit earlier on in the journey than some of the guests in our show this series, we hope that these stories will inspire you, inform you, and maybe help you feel a little bit less alone on that founder journey. And today, for episode 5, and to round out this series, I am joined by Agnes Czako, founder and CEO of AirEx Technologies. Agnes has a strong background in energy efficiency and sustainable building design. And in 2016, she founded AirEx Technologies, a London-based climate tech startup focused on combating fuel poverty and climate change. The company's flagship product is a smart ventilation control system, an intelligent air brick, which automatically regulates airflow and aims to reduce heat loss in homes without compromising on air quality. Agnes was awarded Innovate UK's Women in Innovation Award in 2019 and was selected as one of 24 young climate innovators by UNICEF to present at COP28 in Dubai. And at the end of last year, AirEx was successful in closing their Series A fundraise to help them accelerate their growth and scale into new markets. So I'm very excited to hear all about that journey. Agnes, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Jerry. It's nice to be here.
My pleasure. So tell me more about your journey to founding AirEx. What motivated you to work at that intersection of climate and built environment homes?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have always been very passionate about environmental sustainability ever since I can remember. And that's pretty much all I have worked on in my entire career. So of course, it's a broad area. You can go into many different directions, but I fell into building specifically, and I never looked back, which sometimes surprises me because when you think of construction, you don't imagine a dynamic, innovative, fast-paced environment. It's often quite the opposite. There's a bit of a bad reputation about being old-fashioned and slow-moving and bureaucratic, but it's actually astonishing how much positive impact you can make once you cut through those hurdles, because this is one of the hardest sectors to decarbonize. So my journey started when I moved to the UK about 14 years ago. I immediately wanted to get immersed in sustainability. So initially I joined an energy advisory organization, which was a sister company of Sustainable Ventures, the climate tech incubator that you obviously heard of. And my role there was quite an operational role, and really hands-on. So I was responsible for leading the delivery of a few tens of thousands of fuel poverty assessments in the poorest areas of London. So I personally visited thousands of fuel poor residents, assessing how their buildings perform and how to support them with grant-funded insulation to lower their energy bills. So this was really a shocking experience to see that people, even in the most developed part of the world, in London, people still had to choose between buying food or heating their homes. And that exposure, that real-world exposure to both the sustainability problem and the social problem as well, fuel poverty, that's what made me wanting to do something about it.
Amazing. So you got that real first-hand experience of this is a huge problem that's impacting lives. Yeah. And how did you come up with the solution to that problem? How did you make the leap from there's a big problem here that needs addressing to where you are today and the air brick that you've created?
Yeah, absolutely. So it definitely goes back to those years of the time when I was leading the fuel poverty assessments. So during this time, I also became qualified as a passive house consultant. So I got a fairly good understanding about heat loss in building. And just to demonstrate the severity of the problem, our buildings are responsible for about a quarter of our greenhouse gas emissions. And we know that low carbon heating technologies, heat pumps and other solutions are definitely the future future. They are amazing piece of technologies. They are needed to get to net zero. But right now, just mindlessly chucking in heat pumps into under-insulated buildings is not a wise solution, because the heat demand is too high, and the grid can't cope with that electricity load, and people would end up paying more for their energy bills. So the fabric measures, such as insulation, air tightness, it's more important than ever before in this race to net zero. So what I did, we basically looked into a slightly overlooked area within the building, which is air bricks. So initially we worked in collaboration at the time when I was still with Sustainable Ventures as their venture manager. We worked a collaborative R&D project with one of the researchers in this area. She was from Sheffield University, Dr. Sophie Palsmakers, and she did her entire PhD on the heat loss of suspended floors, which pointed out that this is a really overlooked area and not really well tackled. So we realized that air bricks are responsible for a huge amount of heat loss. So they're overventilated, but at the same time, if people are blocking them permanently, it's not a solution either. It can cause damp and condensation. So to solve this dual challenge, we came up with a smart air brick solution that essentially it has built-in sensors, so it can monitor temperature, humidity, air quality, and it controls the airflow based on that. So all it started with an Innovate UK funded small project just to prove the hypothesis, to prove that it works, and yeah, we took it from there. And I guess one of the main challenges with like with any other hardware companies is to ensure that there is a really robust third-party evidence to show that it works, that it does what it says on the tin. So we conducted shortly after, a couple of years after, a really large field study, one of the largest that's ever been done in the industry and validated by academic research, that it's essentially it brings to a good enough saving. So it's roughly about 7 to 12% savings on an average home's energy bills. And that was really the point when we realized, okay, we need to then capture private investment as well, and we need to scale properly because this is worth pursuing.
And does every home have an air brick? Or is it
not most of the homes. So typically with the subfloor level air brick that ventilates underneath the air cavity, that is typical with every home that has suspended ground floors. So about 1/3 of the UK homes are with this construction. And there is a room level air bricks as well, which is even more common, but not just a UK phenomenon. There's a lot wider market across Europe and even North America as well.
And can you retrofit existing homes with these air bricks, or it's mainly for new builds?
It's actually mainly for retrofit. Yes, that's where the ease of installation kicks in, because it takes about an hour to install per property. So we're focusing primarily on retrofit.
And the like smart IoT enabled aspect of it, how is that controlled? Is it controlled externally, or is it controlled by the homeowner or the tenant? How does that work?
So the tenant or the homeowner don't need to do anything at all. So is it fit and forget? It does the job automatically. So it measures these conditions both at subfloor level, inside and outside the home, and it does the control automatically. So that's with a really simple open or shut mechanism. So on an icy cold day, it keeps shut, and then when the conditions are humid, it lets some fresh air in, but no homeowner control is required.
That is brilliant. Perfect. So I don't have to worry about it. It's just there doing its job. Okay, amazing. And you were a solo founder, right? So what were the kind of benefits and challenges, I suppose, that were associated with that, especially in those first couple of years where you're kind of going out and having to really test this hypothesis and validate the business?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one, because it was a slightly unusual model when AirEx was born. It was essentially a spin out from a climate-focused incubator called Sustainable Ventures. So I mentioned them earlier. So technically, an institution co-founded it with me. But what does it mean in practice is that all the typical founder responsibilities like fundraising and selling in the early days, selling the vision, etc. That all fell onto me, of course, which is quite challenging, but equally it's a really good learning experience. So I never regretted it for a second. But definitely I'm not a technical founder, so I don't have any engineering background at all. I'm a commercial founder, and so it was even more important for me to have a solid, strong engineering small but really good engineering team from day one, so that we can quickly build the necessary prototypes and get some feedback from early customers as early as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think having the support of the venture builder and having the support of Sustainable Ventures behind you was probably very helpful in those very early days of getting it off the ground. And how quickly did you bring in that engineering expertise? How long was it just you on your own before you brought that in?
So essentially, that was already a given, because the two of us were working within Sustainable Ventures, and when we spun out, it was already a team of two, and then really quickly, like literally a few months later, we had a third engineer as well. So that was quite important, because it was necessary for the initial R&D projects to really build those prototypes so quite quickly.
Yeah, amazing. And in terms of that founder journey, obviously you're a first time, this is your first venture, right? First time founder. So how did you navigate like the unknowns and learning all of these things that you'd never encountered before? Was that purely with the support of Sustainable Ventures, or did you have a mentor or other founders? What community has supported you through that?
So I think that's a really important question for anyone, and not just for solo founders, but for anyone at all. That if I look back on that last 8 years of journey, what I would say that one of the best mentors were actually other founders, even founders in the similar stage or slightly further down the line, slightly later stage. And for me, it was even more important to surround myself with lots of like-minded people who were crazy enough to take the plunge. And at most of the pitching events I went to, and most accelerator programs I participated, or startup support programs, I always put in a lot of effort in staying in touch with the founders that I met. And now I'm part of like 15 to 20 different founder WhatsApp group. It's all in climate tech. And we often do regular meetups or just one-to-ones. And it's amazing to be able to bounce ideas, to have a sounding board, because we are going through such similar things and challenges. And the beauty of it is that it's actually non-transactional. We help for the sake of doing the right thing rather than expecting anything in return. And also more recently, so we had a board chair joining our board about a year and a half ago, Julia Groves, and she's been extremely helpful, and I have definitely learned a lot from her, because she's been both on the entrepreneur side but also on the investor side as well. She used to be partners at large VC firms, so she really understands that translation between founder to VC, which is extremely helpful.
Yeah, amazing. And like you just said, having people who are at that same stage of the journey or very slightly ahead of where you are is so invaluable, right? Because they can really relate to the challenges and the struggles that you're going through and be able to help because they've just done it themselves. So yeah, that's excellent. And you built those networks and communities yourself. They're kind of self-built from going to events, meeting people, staying in touch with them, and creating almost these little micro communities yourself.
Yes, definitely. It was all of a self-built effort. Of course, it helps if there are events or programs that are curated for founders to meet. That's really helpful, because otherwise it wouldn't start. So I usually just say yes to these programs, mostly because I want to meet other founders and I want to keep in touch with them. But then afterwards, staying in touch is quite an effort. But I realized over the years that it's a worthwhile effort.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And how did you find the fundraising process? I mentioned in the intro that you just closed a Series A at the end of last year, right? Was it the end of last year?
So about 2 years ago.
Oh, okay. 2 years ago. Oh, wow. Okay. I need to update that. But talk me through that kind of journey through pre-seed, seed to Series A, and how that was for you as a founder, as a female founder, as a solo founder. They are all barriers and obstacles to overcome, I guess, on that fundraising journey.
Yes. So I think I would be surprised if anyone would answer this question that, oh, that's easy. So, of course, it's really challenging, really difficult.
Yeah.
But I think it depends on whether we are talking public funding or private funding. And just to wrap up the public funding quickly, because
Yes.
that's quite important for an early stage hardware company. It usually always starts with R&D grant funding. So I personally found that process super straightforward. It's a very fairly objective process. You submit a thorough business plan and it's scored independently. Of course, the assessors are still making their subjective opinions, but there's not that much bias that can creep into the system. Whereas raising private investment with angel investors initially and then VCs is an entirely different game. There's so much potential unconscious bias there. I'm obviously not just a female founder, but I'm also coming from Eastern Europe. So even 10 years ago, my English was not that great. So I certainly didn't have that sort of experience of having the opportunity to go to a golf course or a tennis course to have our first few angels. So I had to build it up from scratch, which was a very painful process. But I think for me, the most important aspect of it was to have mission aligned investors. So they have to be passionate about the environment and sustainability and climate rather than just a box ticking exercise. So that was really key. And once you find that mission alignment, we can immediately connect a little bit more. We have something in common. We have a shared mission, which really helps communicating and getting to know each other. And obviously, there is a bit of a nervousness within the VC community about investing in hardware, which is relevant to everyone. So everyone else within the climate tech space. But then again, those investors who truly understand climate change, they know that we do need physical, tangible solutions to solve the problem. There's plenty of brilliant software and SaaS companies out there working in the climate space. Yes, they are needed too, but we can't solve the full problem without hardware. So I think it's important to meet investors who are already very comfortable with this already.
Yeah. Absolutely. And going back to that angel round that you raised, so your first, experience of raising private investment, how did you, going from having, as you said, no network, to closing that first round, how did you put that together? So if there's a founder out there that's at that same stage that you were at then, what were some of the steps you took to identify those angels, to build out that list of who to contact, and how did you kind of get the ball rolling?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think instead of individuals, because it's really, really hard, where to start? It's looking for angel groups and angel networks, and often they form into various syndicates, and they could have actually a special theme around it. So thinking of just climate and just sustainability focused angel groups. So one of the most notable one, and obviously they are our investors as well, is Green Angel Syndicate. So lots and lots of like-minded individuals who only want to invest in climate and sustainability. And there are other angel groups specified on female founders as well. So I think one of the key lesson learned for me, and I think especially for female founder, try to be selective and engage those allies even within those organizations, maybe later on for a VC fund, but even in angel groups. Try to engage those who truly care about the impact and who also care about diversity as well. And it's not just a box ticks exercise, which ends up being inevitable, that you might end up being a box tick exercise for someone. And I just figured out recently that there's a real thing called diversity washing. It's an actual phenomenon. But try to engage those people who are actively using their voice to support diverse founders, and they truly mean it. And I would also suggest doing some due diligence on them. So trying to speak to the companies that they invested into. So even with angel groups, they would usually list their portfolio companies on their website. And even if you don't know those companies, it's actually surprising how happily founders are willing to share and happy to share their experiences quite candidly about their investors. So that thorough due diligence is I think quite useful, both at the early stages and even at the later stages at VC stage.
That's a great tip. So reaching out to the founders of companies that are in their portfolio and just finding out what was the experience of going through that process. And yeah, I suppose also if you haven't been through the due diligence process before or with those particular organizations before, you can also use that as a bit of a research exercise, right? To figure out what you need to get in, get prepared, and yeah, how to put your best foot forward, I suppose, for that fundraise. Amazing. And what was the main difference when you went from raising that angel round to then raising a kind of VC backed institutional round? What was the kind of main differences in terms of expectation, in terms of how you need to position the business? What did you find?
Okay, so I think my experience would be probably quite similar to other founders as well, that all of a sudden at that Series A stage, revenue is king. It's really important to be able to show some commercial traction. There are exceptions if it's a really deep tech, hard tech company that takes a lot more time to actually commercialize, and they may need to build their own factories. That's a different story. In our case, it was relatively straightforward, and we were already revenue generating, so there was a much higher expectation towards the commercial part, whereas in the angel round it was mostly about the team. Does this team have the right skills and resources, the right experience? Do they have the drive to do this? But also about the technology, the validation behind it, whereas at Series A, it was mostly commercial. And I think one of the things in preparation that I did ahead of the Series A is I reached out to a few friendly contacts within VCs, and also just random strangers as well. And it was actually quite surprising how many people were willing to and happy to talk to me about, it's more of a soft market research. So instead of actually launching the campaign, I approached a few VCs that, hey, we are looking at raising a Series A in about a year's time. We know that we are not quite there yet, but I would love to have a chat with you. I would love to pick your brain about what's important to you. What are you looking for when you're investing? And that was really well received. And of course, people are much more willing to jump on a call because it's not a hardcore sell. It is really a research and a get to know each other, and that worked really well, and we stayed in each other's radar throughout the years.
And was there anything you learnt from those initial exploratory calls where you realized there was a big gap, where you realized, okay, I didn't realize I was going to have to do that, we're really not ready? Where it enabled you to kind of get your ducks in a row ready for that raise?
Nothing hugely surprising. I think it was more reinforcing the fact that revenue was absolutely key at that point.
And you said just then that going into the Series A, you were fortunate that you already had some revenue coming into the business. Tell me about that early commercial journey then. How you went from those huge kind of research, that huge research study that you did that validated the hypothesis and the problem, and how you went from there to getting the first revenue in and getting that first customer on board.
Yes, absolutely. So part of that validation piece was also, during that time we already had pilots lined up, but it was really, really difficult to get from pilot stage to a full commercial rollout. Right. So for that to happen, the first critical milestone is gaining recognition within the EPC, the Energy Performance Certificate. So most people are familiar with that. Whenever you're renting or selling a property, you have to have this EPC. And now when AirEx is installed on a property, it gives a 2 to 4 point uplift on their EPC. So it could easily reach from a D rating to a C rating, which is an absolute game changer, because there's a really strict legislation that landlords would need to reach EPCC level by 2030. So there's a big rush to achieve that. But in order to get recognized within this EPC, that was an incredibly difficult process. It took about 3 years, having to collect billions of data points. This is the large study that I was referring to earlier. But eventually it was so worth it, because all of a sudden, all these regulatory barriers turned into a tailwind. And now AirEx is fully funded under the UK's energy efficiency or fuel poverty funding programs. So just in the UK, there is £2 billion a year available for the likes of insulation, heating controls, heat pumps, etc. And now AirEx is part of the mix, which
great.
is a game changer because our customers can purchase AirEx. Well, they get it for free, entirely fully funded, either through government funding or it's funded through energy companies. So really, that was the single most important milestone in the company's life. And now we are at the stage of multi-million pounds turnover, which is really exciting because our team is still relatively small, but we were able to scale. But it is really just the start, and we are very excited to scale further.
And so you sell to who are the main customer groups? Is it direct to household, direct to consumer, to energy companies, and then to consumer? What's the model?
So not direct to consumer. We very deliberately taken the route of selling to large housing associations and local authorities, so social landlords who would own tens of thousands of properties typically. And especially in social housing, it is now fully funded. Now, there is the energy company route whereby it's part of the energy company obligation, whereby energy suppliers are mandated to spend a large proportion of their profit on insulation, boiler replacement, heat pumps, and of course now AirEx is becoming part of the mix. So the funder will be the energy company, but our route to market is through installers, contractors, who then reach the end customer, the actual householder.
Yeah, fab. And you mentioned there about the fact that you're now generating millions in revenue is excellent because you've got this small team that's clearly had this outsized impact. You've done a lot with few people, it seems. But talk me through that team building element. So you mentioned in those very early days, you sort of already almost had a ready-made team of kind of 2 or 3 of you, brought the engineering expertise in very early. Talk me through how your kind of team has grown over this last 8 years and through the journey, and what some of the, I suppose, challenges around that have been for you.
Yeah, sure. So, of course, as I mentioned, given the fact that I'm a commercial founder, that was important to bring in engineering really early on. But beyond this, for a fairly long period of time, I basically filled the role for everything other than engineering. So not just the classic founder roles like fundraising and hiring, but also sales and business development activities, marketing and PR, customer service, financial planning, legals, project management, customer insights, everything. And in hindsight, I think probably I should have brought in some specialist roles slightly earlier in the day. But at the same time, fundraising was particularly challenging at an early stage of a hardware company. So it's important. We had to be careful of not overhiring too soon, which I'm really glad that we didn't do. So yeah, now fast forward. Today, we're a team of 18, and we have real functions like people and culture, marketing, etc. And it's really importantly, we also have a solid leadership team who I can trust, and that makes a huge difference.
Absolutely. And as you were building out that 18, I know you said that, well, first of all, you hired someone into a people and culture role fairly early, I suppose, objectively, compared to when a lot of other companies bring them in. And I've heard you speak before about how important that, team culture is to you. So talk me through that piece. Talk me through how you started to define and identify what your culture was as a business, and how you've kind of kept that at the core of your hiring and team growth as you've built up to this team of 18 people.
Yes, sure. So I think in terms of the culture, it has been always really important for me to maintain that mission-oriented culture, that everybody cares about the impact, the social and environmental impact. So that's really embedded into our selection process. It's easy to say that I care about sustainability, but we really look for individuals who truly mean it. So mission-oriented culture, and also the rolling up our sleeves culture, wherever needed, and stepping up wherever needed. So I think it was a good decision to bring in the head of people and culture relatively early on. I think we were about 11, 12 people at the time. So funnily enough, I was advised by multiple people not to do that so early, that, you have plenty of time until you are above 40, 50 people. And I really don't regret bringing that function in early, because it makes such a huge difference to be able to implement people initiatives, to support with people's career progression, training, mentoring, even at the early stages of the company's life. I think that's really rewarding to see, because ultimately it's people who make the magic happen. So we need to look after them. And I think that has been a great thing to bring that in early.
And where you say that you've wrapped kind of identifying mission alignment and culture alignment into that recruitment process, what has that looked like in your world? And have you got any examples, I suppose, for other founders that are listening that equally want to build their culture very intentionally? How can they do that in practice?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I guess it starts and it goes through each stages of the employee experience, really, and starting with recruitment. And as I mentioned earlier, is to look for those individuals who genuinely, truly mean it, and they do care about the social and environmental impact. And then throughout the whole onboarding, highlighting and reinforcing that this is what we care about. And often when for example, at all hands meeting, we talk about our progress. Really often it's about metrics, KPIs, financial KPIs, commercial sales. But what's really important, always to highlight why we are doing this. What does it actually mean? No one gets excited about numbers, financial, sales, KPIs, but impact, if it directly translates with carbon emission reduction, with energy bill reduction, it's so much more meaningful. So just making sure we're regularly communicating that. And that could also mean going on for, we haven't actually implemented it yet, but it's definitely a plan to do impact charity days that is linked strictly with fuel poverty. So really to embed that culture, that we all remind ourselves often enough why we are doing this.
Yeah. I really like that. So do you sort of bring those statistics, I suppose, for want of a better word, that sort of show the impact, the context of what you're doing to the team at all of those meetings, so they feel really grounded in, okay, well, this is actually the impact we've had?
Yeah, absolutely. It also sits in a corner of our little whiteboard in the office as well. That is a carbon emission reduction count, and bill savings count, which is quite fun to see.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, really nice. That's really nice. And like you said, on those hard days when you're an early stage startup and you're a small team and everybody's very stretched, I think they're the things that keep people going, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Is there anything else you do in practice, like in the day-to-day, I suppose, of how your team communicate, how your team work together, that you think is a kind of something special that you have, right? Something that keeps that magic, that culture going, and makes people love working with you?
Yeah, good question. I think the first thing that pops in my mind is we always try to be a no blame culture.
Yeah.
That being said, we are always reminding ourselves that we own our mistakes, and there's nothing wrong with with mistakes. We need to learn from that, and there's that piece of accountability, but definitely avoiding pointing the finger at each other. So the no blame culture is a really important part of it, and also celebrating diversity within the team, which is super important. I think we're so lucky, and that's relevant for any London-based businesses. We have the opportunity to hire the best talent, and in London that comes from absolutely all over the world. And I think that's a really fortunate position to be in, to have that. I genuinely believe that diverse team perform much better, and we have all of those perspectives, which is really fun, and we should celebrate it even more going forward.
Yeah. And you have a hugely diverse team. I've heard, when you've been interviewed before, you mentioned how many different languages are spoken in your business and how many different countries are represented in your team. Tell me what those, do you remember those off the top of your head?
I actually lost count, but it's probably above like 30 different languages spoken within the team, which is quite fun.
That's incredible. And there are lots of startups out there. I mean, I think the tide hopefully is slightly turning on this, although you did just mention the word diversity washing, so perhaps it isn't really. But there are lots of startups out there that would perhaps say, but we're growing quickly. So, we haven't got time to hire, or take the time to be diverse in our hiring. We just need to hire people quickly. Or, but our skills are really niche. And so there's all these kind of barriers, these excuses, I would say, that companies put up as to why their teams aren't more diverse. But you are working, in two areas in which it would be technically quite hard to hire diversely, like built environment, tech. So you're at the kind of intersection of those two, and yet your team is incredibly diverse. So what would you say to those who have these excuses around why their teams aren't more diverse? And what would you say you have done to ensure that yours is? Is there something different you do in that hiring process?
And I guess this is also to acknowledge that we also have room for improvement as well. So it's never really an accomplished story. That we're always continuing to strive for a better and more inclusive environment. So recently, our team has got onboarded into this program organized by the Royal Academy of Engineering. It's called Inclusive Leadership Program, which we're really excited. There's a team of 4, a delegation from our team. I'm not part of it, but I'm watching it with a lot of excitement that they are now mentoring engineering students from disadvantaged, lower socioeconomic backgrounds, which is absolutely amazing to see that. So participating in programs really involves the sense of impact and achievement, which is really good. And I think specifically for the hiring process, there are various different special sites to publish as well. Although most of our advertising are coming mostly from LinkedIn, but I think even there you can find certain groups as well. You can make sure that the language of the application is not full of words such as rock star, A stars, etc. So just really softening that language, making sure that it's encouraging people to apply, even if you don't meet every single criteria. This is just the usual practices about it. And yes, just really embed that culture through various programs. But yeah, there's always more. There's always more room for improvement.
Absolutely. That's brilliant. Thank you. And looking forward to this kind of next part of AirEx's journey, I suppose, first of all, from a kind of policy and regulatory perspective, if we start there, where do you think we're at in terms of UK policy and regulation? Are we going in the right direction? Is there still more that needs to be done? And when it comes to sustainable building design, what would you really like to see change and improve over the next few years to help us really move the needle?
Yes, that's a really good question. So I think, we policy, particularly regulations and policy within the built environment, is incredibly outdated. It's not necessarily famous about welcoming innovation, which is a problem because we do need to achieve net zero. And without innovation, there is no chance. So we absolutely have to embrace innovation. And so working with AirEx, we throughout the last few years, we didn't actually change anything in policy, but we really needed to work hard to ensure that AirEx fits within the existing regulatory framework. And that took years of effort. And it often felt like hitting our head against the brick wall, quite literally. But it's ultimately have been successful after years of effort, and now these barriers are turning into a tailwind, which is a brilliant experience. But I think despite this, I continue to advocate for a more agile regulatory framework, because we really need to unleash that innovation rather than regulation hindering innovation. So even if it's not necessarily needed for our company, for AirEx anymore, but the whole industry can hugely benefit from it. So myself and a few of our colleagues are really happily sharing our experiences in open forum, because it can help the wider industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And in a kind of more commercial footing, I suppose, if we're looking at AirEx and your future as a business over the next year or so, what are you excited about? What are you driving towards? What are the kind of goals and ambitions for you and your team over this next 12 months?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think for the immediate term, the immediate plan is rolling out AirEx across the UK's social housing sector, tens of thousands of properties. And now that we can actually tap into these few poverty subsidies, we can really scale quickly, and that is imminent. So up until towards the end of last year, we have been focusing on primarily on the Scottish market, so the Warmer Home Scotland scheme, and now the floodgates are opening up to the entire UK-wide market. So that's very much the focus imminently. And beyond this, we are also exploring other regions like Northern Europe with countries with similar construction type and similar climatic region. And of course, there's a lot of new products on the horizon as well. Same principle, but different adaptation of our technology at different parts of the home. So it's exciting, and yeah, watch this space.
Very exciting. That's very, very exciting. So both looking at kind of scaling out the reach of your existing product, but also looking at some new complementary products as
absolutely.
well. Fantastic. I love that. And is there any, just as we round out, any key pieces of advice that you would give to any founders, perhaps at the beginning of their journey? One core piece of advice for founders, and then maybe one core resource that they can tap into or use.
Okay. Yes, there could be so many pieces of advice, but one thing that pops immediately to my mind is somewhat patience and to be kind to yourself, and it takes time to build a company, and often this picture of the whole Silicon Valley model created a slightly skewed view on how quickly things should grow. And this doesn't mean of a lack of ambition, it's just the reality that hardware takes a longer time, especially in industries that are heavily regulated and hard to decarbonize. So there's a lot of upfront effort needed before it starts to turn into a real hockey stick. But the good news here is that once you put those efforts in initially, then the hockey stick can actually be a lot sharper. So just being realistic about that, and always have a plan B. And yes, in terms of resources, I think previously I mentioned talk to other founders. That's one of the most important one. I think we're fortunate enough that we are based in here in a county hall building run by Sustainable Ventures. So there are 150 climate tech companies sharing office all under the same roof. So that's super exciting to be able to bounce ideas, share resources, and no one is competing with each other. We are all working towards the same goal. But I think beyond that, also capturing and engaging allies within organizations. So even the most bureaucratic, slow-moving organizations, there's always going to be someone really progressive who wants to drive positive change. So I would say stick to those allies, and help them out too, because they want to spread your success stories.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. Thank you so much. Agnes, thank you so much for taking the time to share that journey with us, share those learnings and those experiences and that advice with the founders listening today. And I wish you and the team the best of luck over the rest of this year and beyond.